think it was actually a combination of a number of factors. The fact was that Trevor was the singer and I was the keyboard player, and that was our little entity. Yes, we're working just as a three-piece without a keyboard player and singer, because Anderson and Wakeman had gone at that time. We were both managed by Brian Lane, and I think he was some way institutional in suggesting it, and the actual initial thing came about when Brian Lane asked us to write a track for Yes, who were then rehearsing as a three-piece at the Townhouse Studios with Chris Allen and Steve. And we wrote this song which is called You Can Fly From Here, which a few people will probably have on bootlegs and that sort of thing. I'm sure they do. We did it with Bill Bruford and Chris Squire. And that was one of the tracks that was actually put forward on Drama. We actually did record it. And then the other material came about. We had I'm a Camera, which was then sort of modified into Yes fashion, became a much longer track, and that became Into the Lens. But effectively it was the same song, and Trevor and myself had the bones for that song. So yeah, I mean, it was. We went into a couple of rehearsals and came up with a few bits for Machine Messiah, and then I think Brian said, look, we should go with this, and do an album, a Yes album. And we had to see Ahmet Ertegun, who was head of Atlantic Records then. He came over and had a listen and said, yeah, go with it. So that's pretty much the background of how it all came about. And then Chris wanted to bring Eddie Offord back into the frame, because obviously they'd had, the classic Yes albums prior to that had been done by Eddie Offord, the early ones, like the Yes album and Fragile. And I think it was that era more than anything else that we were more allied to, rather than the relayer going for the one period. I think it was much more, Chris Squire wanted to go back more to the feel of the Yes album and Fragile, and if you look at the set list that we did around that time, much of the material was in that sort of ilk. If you look at a band like Yes and you look at the career that they've had and the enormous volume of music they've put out over the years, and it really is a tremendous catalogue of work, and I think that I'm privileged to be involved in at least 2 chapters of that book. And I think that Yes music will go on. I don't think it. You hear people say, well, such and such should be in the band. It's not really about that. The whole thing about Yes is that it's about the music that was created by whoever's in the band at the time. And I think that, people never, for instance, acknowledge Trevor Rabin's era period. But I mean, I think that's as justifiable as any other period of Yes, and in so much as, it showed then at that time that Yes had a different angle and they could present themselves in another way, and I think that's important, is that a band can constantly reinvent itself, and I think that's why the band is still going 43 years later. It was really strange if you think about it in hindsight, because I think Yes had always been this big revered progressive rock band, and we were seen as coming in there as a couple of imposters, if you like. It was like, I can't get a couple of pop guys coming in and joining, our band. So there were quite a lot of resentment from a lot of the sort of die-hard Yes fans. I think they thought that it had somehow desecrated the Yes legacy, and from our own standpoint, it didn't really seem that weird. There was a lot of press about it. They called it the Yeggles and things like that. As a very tongue-in-cheek. But I think in some ways the album itself, when people actually took it on, on face value, it was a good album. And I think that whether you were a Yes purist or not, the fact is that the previous album, Tormato, had not been a popular album with the Yes fans, even that. And I think that the Drama album stood up as being, a step in the right direction for Yes at that point. So it wasn't as hard for me as it was for Trevor. I think Trevor had the unenviable task of taking over Yes's only lead singer, whereas Yes had 3 previous keyboard players to me, so it wasn't so bad for me. I'd say that there's over half is completely new material. Maybe even 60 or 70% is completely new material. Certainly, the two main tracks on Fly From Here that me and Trevor put in, we had versions of them as far back as when we were working with Yes before, but. I think again they'd never really been explored. I think Fly From Here itself as a song was never really explored, and I don't really know why it was left off Drama. I think that we never actually completed that recording in the studio with Eddie Offord. So I just think that maybe it was left off for a reason, that it was going to be revisited at a later stage. I don't know, but certainly I think that. It sounds very Yes-like, and it's certainly got a lot of the qualities that people associate with Yes. And again, it's I think this album Fly From Here is a very it's a new chapter in Yes's history, which is, I guess, the band just goes on and on. It's just another chapter in the book.